So let's now talk about roles and responsibilities. Now, this is more relevant if you have a group or a team working on the project, whether it's a group of volunteers or you're partnering with somebody else who's also working on it with you, or you have a team, employees in place working on the project. Or it might be that you have yourself sort of running the project, but you also have people who will be helping out every now and then, or you might have partners who are involved, or funders, or whatever it is. And this is where you would detail who they are, what their role is, what their responsibilities and tasks are, and you would have their contact details so that you have those accessible at any point. Let me share this in the template with you, and let's just run through this. So here an example, and the benefit, first of all, of having a roles and responsibilities is that it, especially when you have other people involved, it sets out from the beginning what everyone's responsibilities are, what your expectations are of them, what their expectations are of you. This is a two-way pathway. Often we get, in projects, most of the conflicts that occur as a result of misaligned expectations. I didn't know that was part of my role. I thought you were doing that. And this is a way we can mitigate some of that by clearly outlining from the outset who's involved and what they're doing. So very simply, for example, you'd add their name, you'd add their role and their title, and then you'd list out in as much detail as makes sense all of their responsibilities and tasks, everything that you've agreed. If it's not in this list, then they have a right to push back on anything that's been sort of handed over to them, or has been sort of directed at them without them knowing. So you want to include everything so that they are very clear on their role. And then you want to have their email, telephone, maybe you'll have some additional columns here so that there's a very, very quick way of being able to access their contact details. A very simple tool, but very, very vital. The next tool we're going to look at is Lessons Learned Log. Now, this is almost always missed. One of the biggest inefficiencies I see, though, is a lack of knowledge sharing on lessons learned, which means you end up doing the same mistakes over and over, right? Whether you're working with a team or you're working independently, we often, if we're not logging things as we go along, we end up making the same mistakes. So a lessons learned log is crucial to do throughout your project as things occur, and should not be left until the end when you're likely to have forgotten about it. And this will also be used as part of the end of program, end of project review, which we'll go over later. But you want to have this going and in place with your whole team from the onset, so that you're learning things as you go along. You're addressing those lessons if there's a mistake that occurred, so you're addressing those in real time, but then you're also able to reflect back and make sure that you have those logged so that you don't make the same mistakes again and again and again. So let's have a look at this in the template. Here we have your lessons learned log. There's a number system just so that you can number them. Useful if you need to refer to lessons quite quickly. So I've got an example here of a lesson. Social media posts need to be shorter. So we identified that they're too long. They are too long. People are not reading them. People are not engaging with them. What does it affect? It's a lack of engagement in posts. We're not getting people reading past sort of the first line or two. What does it affect? Maybe the brand of the business, but also engagement and attendance. The recommendation, limit social posts to maximum 300 words. And then we've got some additional notes here. Consider reaching optimal word count for different social media platforms. So this might be do some research on optimal word count. So there's an action there, you'd log it, and then who the owner of who logged it. Again, a very simple tool, but vital in ensuring that you're making mistakes, yes, but you're learning from those mistakes. Let's now talk about risk management. This can be a bit of a beast. I would say that for smaller scale projects, probably the SWOT analysis and the project canvas where you identified some of those risks is enough. If you're working with vulnerable groups and safeguarding is a thing, then you're definitely going to need a risk assessment. If we're talking about more complex projects where there's, potentially like physical danger in terms of like construction, anything involving children, anything like that, you're going to want a risk assessment. If your project is small scale, you're not working with vulnerable groups, then you're less likely to need to go into the detail of doing a risk analysis or risk management. But risk is essentially, it's the potential of a situation or event happening that will impact your project. But the key here is it's an uncertain event that, if it occurs, will have an effect on the project. It's not a known thing. So whilst the very definition of risk suggests uncertainty, generally there are still things that we can be done that we can do to, one, affect whether a risk occurs or not, and two, influence how much of an impact it might have on a project if it did occur. And we can do this by considering the potential risks beforehand, assessing the probability and the impact, so we understand the seriousness of the threat or the risk. And then we have a set of responses ready at hand should we need it, should it happen in real life. Okay, so let's have a look at the template workbook and run through an example whilst I explain the template. So first of all, we've got the risk description, and this is detailing the nature of the risk. So the example that I have here is poor communications and marketing copy via social media. Okay, so there's a risk there. There's a risk that, we'll send out poor communication or marketing. And then we move on to the effect. And the effect is, what impact essentially does this risk have if it was to occur? What effect would it have? What's the impact or the consequences? And so here I have a lack of engagement, interest, and attendance to the workshop, which is quite crucial for us because we need people to attend in order to continue running it. Then we have an assessment of the probability. Okay, so the probability is how likely is it to occur? So we know that risk is uncertain. It doesn't mean that it will happen, but what is the probability of it happening? And we would mark it 1 to 3. Okay, 1 is unlikely, 2 is possible, and 3 is likely. And I'm going to show you the matrix which outlines this assessment more clearly, and you will get this a bit more. But let me run through this template first. Then we assess the impact. So the impact is different from the probability. The probability is how likely is the risk likely to occur. The impact is, if it were to happen, to what extent would it impact the project? To what extent would it impact the project? And in order to classify these two things, the probability and the impact, you would go to the next worksheet, which is the risk classification. And here you can see probability. You can mark it 1 to 3. So 1 is it's unlikely, 2 is it's possible, 3 is it's likely. Okay. And then you've got the impact on this axis. So it would have a low impact, it would have a medium impact on the project success, or it would have a high impact. And once you've identified the numbers, so you would put, so the probability of the example we gave was poor communication and marketing copy. The probability of that happening is quite possible, actually, because for For me, I'm doing most of the marketing, and I do not have a marketing degree. I have very little marketing experience. And so it's very possible. It is my own business. And so I'm going to try my very best to ensure that it doesn't negatively impact the project or my business. And so I put possible. So I've given it a 2. Yeah, I've given it a score of 2. The impact that it would have, I've given it a score of 2 again. So it would have a medium impact. It would impact my reputation. All social media and messaging is live. If I were to say something that didn't quite sit well with people, that could have an impact not only on the workshop and the success of the workshop and the project, but my business. And so too could it have an effect on the venue's business. So it could have a medium impact. So then you would use this matrix to determine what level of rating it would give. So 2 times 2, it's given me a medium rating. Yep, so you would use this matrix once you've identified the probability and the impact, you would then see where those 2 meet. So I've given it a 2 probability and a 2 impact, and it has a medium. And I would pick the drop down list here and I would click medium. Essentially what this is doing, and you can see by this rating, is it's the equation is the probability times the impact. That's all that it's doing. So you could essentially work that out yourself. You could say 2 times 2 equals 4, and it's sitting in that medium. Yeah. Then you would be able to give it a response based on the level of rating it has. If this were high, I would probably have a response that's a bit more appropriate to its seriousness. This is a medium risk, and so what I might choose to do in this case is engage with a social media agency who have worked on similar events with success before and who have the experience in order to do this, as a way of mitigating or minimizing that risk. It might be that I decide that only social media messaging goes through me. So whoever's doing it, that messaging has to go through me to be audited and checked before it goes out. And then I would put who the owner of the risk is. And the owner is likely to be different if you have a team, depending on the context of the risk. So if I had an ops person and a marketing person and a finance person, I'd probably assign this role to the marketing person. Now, the reality of this workshop and this project was that I was mainly working on it, and so all of the owners are going to be me. And so you can use the data that you got from the SWOT analysis and the project canvas in order where you sort of brainstormed what those risks might be. And then you can input them into this risk assessment and start to assess them based on their probability and impact and have a ready response. Particularly important if you're working with a team or a group of people, so that they understand how to respond to situations like this. But again, as I mentioned, if this is a small scale project, you probably won't need to do this degree of risk assessment. It may just be enough to have identified them in the SWOT analysis and the project canvas. Excellent. Now have a go back to the roles and responsibilities, the lessons learned document and risk management templates, and run your practice project through them. Once you've completed those, move on to the next step.